This video is brought to you by NordVPN. Go to nordvpn.com/KingK to save 70% on a 3-year plan, and stay tuned to see how I use NordVPN to get around archaic and frankly unnecessary region-blocked content restrictions.
You've conquered red. You've mastered blue. You've triumphed over yellow. You've caught them all. And now you're ready for the next step. Welcome to the world of Pokemon Gold and Silver. Tons of new Pokemon, new adventures and worlds to explore, new badges to collect. So you've got to ask yourself, have you got what it takes? Pokemon Gold and Silver, rated E for everyone. Gotta catch 'em all.
By the turn of the millennium, Pokemon was already on top of the world. Red and Blue had sold up to and perhaps even beyond 5 million units in its first couple years on store shelves in Japan, and yet more still in the United States. It outsold Final Fantasy VII a full year and some change after its release. The newly established franchise had an anime, a movie, a trading card game, a litany of spin-offs, toys, fast food tie-ins, and other merchandise. When people say Pokemon fever had set in, they weren't kidding. Global phenomenon would be an understatement. And so, the show must go on. Pokemon Gold and Silver. An entirely new region filled with new characters, music, locations, and of course, 100 brand new Pokemon. New features on top of a tried and true gameplay formula. Gold and Silver would begin the trend of generational releases that iterate on Red and Blue's extremely solid social foundation. Critics at the time were impressed by the sequel, and yet more fans echoed those sentiments. Even today, Generation 2 is a contender for the most revered generation of all time. Much of that praise no doubt comes from the phenomenal remakes, Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but we won't be discussing those in this video. The remakes will be handled in their own video at a later date. My aim with this series is to examine each generation's flagship titles in their purest form, to see what they each added to the franchise throughout the years. In this video, we'll be primarily discussing the initial releases, Gold and Silver, and then comparing them with the changes brought by their sister release, Pokemon Crystal. Strap in as we explore the highs and lows of Johto, a Pokemon Gold and Silver retrospective.
Let's try this again. Now concentrate. Think Pichu, Lugia, Pikachu, Chikorita, Cyndaquil. Cool.
The new Collector's Edition Gold and Silver Pokemon Game Boy Color. A true Pokemon master may do anything to get it.
Oh, how about 5 more for my friends?
Where Kanto was based on the greater Tokyo area of Japan, with a mythos derived from its urban technological roots, Johto is largely based on Japan's Kansai region, a rural countryside filled with historic monuments and ancient legends. Japan's first capital city was built in the Kansai region, where much of Japan's stereotypical cultural traditions sprung forth. Home to Buddhist monuments, castles, and other structures dating back thousands of years, it's a region with a storied history. You can see that reflected in the Johto region. There's a more relaxed tone than that of Red and Blue. Team Rocket returns in an even less threatening fashion than before, now lacking a clear leader. They rile up the Slowpoke well and hijack a radio tower, to which the region itself seems almost indifferent. All it takes is the player and the region's champion to stomp out the dissidents in short order. This lack of any substantial conflict leaves the player with a fairly unobtrusive adventure, where cultural centers and legends are instead the point of focus. Mewtwo and the legendary birds were an interesting backdrop to the Kanto region, but not one explicitly developed by the main story. Uncovering the clues about Mewtwo in the Pokemon Mansion made its discovery in Cerulean Cave all the sweeter. However, Johto places more emphasis on those legends, elaborating on areas like the Burnt Tower. You have an explicit meeting with the legendary dog trio. Ho-Oh and Lugia reside in their own dungeons, structures, or formations that date back hundreds or even thousands of years. Ekritik is the city where the legendary dogs were rumored to have perished in the flames, their lifeless bodies resurrected into mythological creatures by Ho-Oh. They're essentially ghosts that roam the region and exist only in the stories the residents tell each other, except to those who prove themselves worthy of their attention. What I love about all this, though, is that even though it's given much more direct attention, there's still so much left up to your own interpretation. What happened to the tower? Why did Ho-Oh leave? Why is Lugia hidden deep in the Whirl Islands? What are the Whirl Islands? These questions don't have clear answers. By talking to the NPCs throughout the region, you paint a fairly broken picture of events that might have occurred long ago, but you'll never truly know whether the tales have been skewed by the passing of time or human bias. You'll never have all the answers, but the game still lets you encounter these beasts and come to your own conclusions. It does feel like a few of these areas are a bit undercooked. In Gold and Silver, there's so much left up to your imagination in the ruins of Alph that it feels less like you're piecing together the remnants of an ancient civilization, and more like you're solving disconnected picture puzzles depicting completely random Pokemon. Unknown are a bit too esoteric for my liking. Instead of asking how did these things come to be in a wondrous sense, I start asking myself why a species exists modeled after every letter in the English alphabet. It is still a mystery, but it lacks the charming allure of other areas. Still, I was contemplating the layout and history of the region as a whole in a way that Kanto only teased. Where Red and Blue reflected an Earthbound-esque modern fantasy adventure, Gold and Silver are more reminiscent of a Dragon Quest or early Final Fantasy. It's remarkable how different Johto feels to traverse. Instead of a big circle with bustling city centers and skyscrapers, Johto is a region surrounded by dense forests and caves, where paths feel naturally paved rather than retrofit for modern traversal. You get towns like Azala, where weather is predicted by Slowpoke, Violet City with a giant tower entirely dedicated to the worship of Bellsprout, most likely allusions to ancient Buddhist monuments and structures that are still standing in Kansai today. You have to travel across the sea to get some medicine for the lighthouse Pokemon, perhaps because Johto doesn't have a solid medical infrastructure that could widely distribute these kinds of products. It's a region that, for better or worse, is steeped in tradition and seems resistant to change. Goldenrod and Olivine City are the only two locations even comparable to the technological developments of Kanto cities. Every other town is much smaller in size, usually surrounded by natural formations, like the Lake of Rage or Mount Silver. Let me put it this way. Where Kanto had far more human developments, like the cycling road, Johto is the exact opposite. At first, I was taken aback by just how little substance there was to towns like Cianwood or Mahogany, but it actually suits the region's laid-back atmosphere perfectly. So too does its music. Red and Blue had a selection of songs that were pretty simple. Battle themes for wild Pokemon and trainers were different, and so were the gym leaders and champion, which was a pretty neat way to highlight those more important fights. Other than that, though, the soundtrack was fairly standard. Cave music, city music, it was a fair bit ordinary. When it tried to go beyond expectations, we got the Pokemon Mansion theme. And Lavender Town. Gold and Silver are a pretty big step up despite using the same sound chip. It's evident as soon as the starting town that something has changed. There's more detail in the composition, and that detail breathes more life into each of the cities throughout Johto. Ekritik in particular has always been a favorite of mine. I would imagine it hard to capture the essence of a city's storied history, but this theme captures that and then some. It's a quiet, contemplative track. Team Rocket have their own battle theme now. There's a slight variation on the wild Pokemon theme depending on the time of day. It's not a terrifically huge jump, and I can't even say I listened to the soundtrack much at all on my own, but it's enough of an improvement on Red and Blue that I thought it worth mentioning, and contributes a lot to its atmosphere. Bear in mind that I am talking about the soundtrack as it existed on the Game Boy, so don't start throwing the remakes at me. Those remixed songs are indeed fantastic, but those came later. The Game Boy Color afforded Johto far more detail than was ever present in Red and Blue. You could actually figure out what these things looked like without watching the anime or buying trading cards. New Pokemon like Sentret resemble the Tanuki, which is extremely relevant to Japanese folklore. Sneasel is likely based on the Kami-Tachi, a type of yokai or demon. This extends to other folklore as well. Natu and Xatu are based on the Kakapo, and by extension, the New Zealand Maori tribe that worshipped them. Teddiursa and Ursaring are possibly derived from the Ursa Minor constellation and the myths surrounding it. My favorite example is Delibird, with its appearance likely based on the Rockhopper penguin, but with a color scheme clearly copied from Santa Claus. There also seems to be an emphasis on species and concepts related to history or the passage of time. Larvitar's entire line is reminiscent of the dinosaurs, as is Meganium. Sudowoodo is likely based on fossilized wood. Piloswine is a combination of wild boar and the mammoth. Of course, it is worth noting that not all of them fall so rigidly within these themes, as most regions don't have a strict set of rules. Corsola seems to be based on coral, and Pineco on, well, take a wild fucking guess. Though there are only 100 new additions, I'd say their visual design is a cut above the previous generation, if even only slightly. Baby Pokemon are brilliant in their cute, compact renditions of previous lines. Along the same vein, new evolutions breathe life into Pokemon I used to be ambivalent toward. Scyther was always a decent design, but the addition of Scizor was the sole reason I fell in love with the line. His bladed arms turned into full-on pincers. Steelix did the same for Onix, turning a fairly standard rock caterpillar thing into this legitimately terrifying steel dragon, even though they really aren't all that different at their core. All it took for that perspective to change was, literally, just a new coat of paint. And I love it. While Rattata's line has never personally interested me, Sentret and Furret are adorable, to the point where I sometimes consider using them for their appearance alone. Apart from more basic designs like Ariados and Sunflora, Ken Sugimori was on top of his game. Some of my all-time favorites originated here. Houndour, Teddiursa, Sneasel, Skarmory, Scizor, Crobat. It's not hard to see why the Johto editions are so beloved. Unfortunately then, we run into a bit of a problem child. Celebi. Much like Mew, this was an event Pokemon, or as they're known nowadays, mythical Pokemon. To get it, a player had to have the GS Ball downloaded onto their system using the Mobile System GB, where Japanese players could get special events onto their mobile phones and transfer them to their Game Boy system. Though it was short-lived, and for good reason, my god. Celebi is a really cool Pokemon, a psychic grass type, the guardian of Ilex Forest, based on the mythical fairy or Kodama. Some have even said it references Shintoism. The shrine in Ilex Forest is certainly reminiscent of Shinto shrines, so I can see where that comes from. Yet another addition to Johto lore that has me questioning where it came from and how it once influenced the region and its people. However, in its introductory game, Celebi was not only an event Pokemon, meaning you'd miss out on it if you didn't download the event, it was also a Japanese exclusive event Pokemon, meaning other territories simply could not encounter it. Additionally, Generations 1 and 2 had a unique quirk to their design, which meant that the actual games were, in a sense, region-locked. Game Boys weren't region-locked, oh no. The games themselves were only able to communicate with other cartridges of the same region, meaning that a US cartridge and a Japanese cartridge could not communicate. This meant that even if you had a Japanese friend with a Celebi on their cartridge, you still couldn't get your hands on Celebi if you weren't using a Japanese cartridge. Which, yes, means that if you lived outside of Japan and saw someone with a Celebi at school in their Game Boy cartridge, they had either cheated or traded with someone who had cheated. For me, there are no two ways about this. It sucks. Everything about it sucks. Pokemon are the name of the game here. Often the most exciting draw for players come a new generation are the new Pokemon. To use them in battle, to find new favorites, and to see what they contribute to the lore or universe. Legendary Pokemon are often the most intriguing new additions, since they have wider implications for a region's mythology. Celebi feels like it slots in naturally with the theming of Generation 2 designs, but then was cut out of the game and could only be accessed via an event with frankly poor distribution methods. I do not like the precedent this set for future games, where this problem would only get worse. In an effort to make certain Pokemon elusive and rare, I feel like it's had the effect of robbing the player of in-game information and forcing them to go watch the anime or new movies that will most assuredly have more information about that Pokemon you couldn't go to an event for because you had school or your mom didn't want to drive to Toys R Us that day or something. I mean, sure, it's a great business strategy. This franchise didn't rise to the top for nothing. It just sucks. Region locking sucks. You know what would have been helpful for this stupid Celebi event? Probably a VPN, to eradicate the very idea of regional barriers. Or maybe I won't be laughed at for being born in and existing inside the United States just because I want to stream Ghibli movies or something. In fact, for this specific purpose, I use NordVPN. With just a single click, as far as your computer or mobile device is concerned, you now live in Canada or Europe or Japan, all without your internet service provider reading and potentially selling that information to interested third parties. Man, what a world we live in where that has to be a concern. If what I've said interests you, you can get 70% off a 3-year plan now by typing in nordvpn.com/KingK. This would make your subscription only $3.49 per month, plus a free additional month with a 30-day money-back guarantee if you don't like what you've signed up for. Again, that's if you use nordvpn.com/KingK. Never let Game Freak tell you that you can't have a Celebi ever again.
What do big kids want? More spikes! More flips! More flips! More flips! Big kids want to be treated like big kids.
Hey, we hear you. That's why the Burger King Big Kids meal has more great tasting food, fun, and of course, a cool toy. Want to take Game Boy to a whole new level? You can come to Burger King to celebrate the release of Pokemon Gold and Silver.
Pikachu!
With new mini Game Boy collectible toys. 8 different toys with all new characters. And a cool Pokemon figure. There's one in every Big Kids meal. Taste rules!
Conceptually, Johto is well put together. Team Rocket takes a back seat to the region's mythos, there's a more laid-back atmosphere. The new Pokemon mostly run with this theme and are excellent in their visual designs. Unfortunately, there are a few aspects of how it's all implemented that make me question just how good it feels to play when compared to Kanto. Before we can talk about that, I'm gonna need to explain my approach. In Red and Blue, I decided to use Pokemon as I caught them, which meant that I'd catch Pokemon and use them semi-randomly, rather than building a team. It was an interesting approach that I can't say I often take, and got me to use certain Pokemon that I'd never experimented with before. It meant that I actually used the legendary birds for main story fights, which is another thing I rarely do. While this is a perfectly serviceable way to play these games, I feel like you get a lot more out of Pokemon when you're working with a set team of 6. Taking a look at which Pokemon you can catch in the main adventure, making sure none of the types overlap, and ending on a balanced team that can deal with most threats thrown at them. For the sake of example, I'm gonna walk through the team I used for my Gold playthrough. Meganium is a bulky grass type with a move pool that focuses on healing itself and buffing the team's defenses with Reflect or Light Screen. It can take a decent hit, keep itself alive, and deal back a moderate amount. Forretress is a more extreme addition, with a ton of resistances due to its steel bug typing and a ridiculously high defense stat. While it can't deal much damage, it can create entry hazards and inflict deadly status conditions to stall out powerful opponents. Lantern has a high HP stat with an incredibly unique water-electric typing that can cover a lot of weaknesses with same type attack bonus. It's two of the best types wrapped into one. Our team right now has a lot of defensive utility and covers a wide range of typings, but is clearly lacking in raw power. Tauros is a powerhouse of a normal type who can not only deal incredibly powerful physical damage, but can learn a variety of moves thanks to its typing. Sudowoodo has a mix of physical defense and attack, a powerful counter to other physical attackers, especially with its rock typing. Finally, to round things out, we have a psychic flying type in Xatu to fill a mixed attacker role between the two types. This is our team, and they have a ton of unique strengths, but it's very hard to create a team with no weaknesses. If we ever come up against a physically defensive wall, we don't exactly have any top-tier special attackers to break through. Our overall statistical power is on the lower end in general, with a focus on utility. We don't have many answers to dark or psychic types, especially since Forretress isn't focused on attacking in the conventional sense. Still, it's a team with many unorthodox strengths, and doing the research to fill in a team like this is extremely rewarding. Part of the reason why I keep coming back to these games so readily is because there are so many options. In Gold and Silver alone, there are over 200 options. You can mix and match new teams in any way you want, and you probably won't even see them all in your lifetime. Not only that, focusing on a set team of 6 is bound to create interesting stories, which can help the player to bond with each monster on a more intimate level. Maybe your Golbat landed a surprise critical hit in a tough battle, or withstood an attack with 1 hit point remaining. Think of the stories that spiral out of team building. Think of the favorites you'll develop, the misconceptions you'll dash about certain monsters you used to not care about. It's hard not to feel like this is the encouraged playstyle when Ash fosters his own team of 6 every generation, and pretty much every champion in every game has a set team of 6. Going through Johto again with a pre-established team has been an eye-opening experience for me. Though I did play the original Silver version a long time ago, the vast majority of my experience with the region has been through its remakes, which were made in a generation where various other elements were introduced to the series. You go through the region from the southeast, cut through in a zigzag motion until you're at the north middle, then travel to the west, and then backtrack all the way to the east. It's a lot less elegant than Kanto's progression, but it does still offer its own non-linear progression after you obtain 4 badges. Jasmine, Chuck, and Price can be challenged in any order the player wishes, though I have to admit that it's a little more underwhelming. In Kanto, the gyms you could tackle out of order were in this circular ring that allowed the player to take whichever path they wanted. You could go southeast and challenge Koga first, or you could head for Celadon immediately and trek through the cycling road to fight Koga after. Either way, there's an unexplored path you can use to make it back to Saffron City to fight Sabrina. You could also fight Sabrina first and then deal with Erika and Koga after in whichever order you want. It flows naturally from one point to another no matter the playthrough, and is a refreshing break from the linear progression. In Gen 2, you get Fly after beating Chuck, and he's also in the city where you get the medicine to unlock Jasmine, so you're probably going to be challenging him before Jasmine no matter what. Realistically, your choices are to travel to the Lake of Rage and fight Price first, with Chuck coming after, or you could go do Chuck and then pick between Jasmine and Price. I always find myself heading toward Chuck because you can fly to Jasmine right away, and then fly to Ecruteak to start making your way toward the Lake of Rage. I just don't know why I wouldn't want to get Fly right off the bat, especially since going to the Lake of Rage first would mean that your trek across the region turns into zigzag, north, east, back west, west even more, back east, and then east even more. It's just unnecessarily complicated. I don't think there's anything wrong with this inherently. I still love many of the future games, and they don't let you sequence break at all. Linear Pokemon is still fun in its own right, and even has its own strengths when compared to non-linear Pokemon. But the trouble with Gen 2 is that they still needed to account for the idea that the player could potentially do these 3 gyms in any order. As a result, the gyms all hover around level 30. Gym leaders are usually the most difficult trainers of any given stretch, and as such their level range is a fair bit above the norm. Every trainer you fight before them has to be a much lower level to make each gym leader more standout. There's a huge gap between Erika, Koga, and Sabrina, around 10 levels worth even, which has the effect of raising the average trainer level in this circuit. It meant that the journey to these gym leaders remained as consistently challenging as the leaders themselves. Other than Jasmine's oddball Steelix at level 35, the most challenging levels you'll encounter in this stretch of gameplay are only 5 levels higher than the 4th gym leader, and that means each trainer in between will stagnate heavily. You might have a bit of a challenge at first, but you will quickly find yourself steamrolling the competition before Claire. This problem extends past the Johto League and into the Kanto postgame in a more dire fashion. Trainer Red, the most powerful trainer in the game by a country mile, is sitting up near the high 70s, low 80s. The Johto champion, Dragon Tamer Lance, ranges from 45 to 50. Johto is a dense region, maybe not quite the size of Kanto, but something comparable. It's a full 8 gym badge campaign with story fights, dungeons, routes, and a league fight. Kanto in this game is comparatively short. In fact, you could probably explore everything it has to offer in 4 or 5 hours maximum, and that's if you're really taking your time. On this journey, you'll be collecting the Kanto gym badges in almost any order you desire, working up to Mount Silver for the battle with Red. What's strange about this stretch of time are the underwhelming level ranges that exist between Lance and Red. I'll remind you that Lance's Pokemon all hovered around the high 40s. Lieutenant Surge, likely the first gym you'll tackle after leaving the SS Aqua, has a team of low 40s and 1 level 46. This is true for Sabrina, Koga, Erika, Misty, Brock. They're all the same. Blue ratchets up a few levels for the last Kanto gym, but in between him and Red is Mount Silver, a 2-room cave with no trainers. You go from a set of level 50s to a set of near 80s. Now, I understand and relish the idea that Red is supposed to be the most powerful trainer there is. That's really damn cool, especially if you considered yourself to be the most powerful trainer in Red and Blue. It's a powerful twist, but he comes on too strong and too fast. I should acknowledge that this is simply something I've noticed whenever I revisit Johto. I'm sure it isn't a universal principle, and I'm positive a lot of people watching would dispute this, but there just seems to be a lack of trainers to stay consistently leveled. When I say that, I don't mean to be the exact same level as Red, just not to be close to 30 levels below his team. One of my favorite things about building a team is that you can often develop strategies to win against a team that is a bit stronger than yours. 5, 10, or even 15 levels above if you're really stretching it isn't usually a big deal, since you can use status effects or stat boosting moves to even the playing field. That's why it doesn't really bother me much that the Elite Four are a step up in levels. They aren't so much higher that you'll want to give up, they're just high enough to make you consider other strategies before resorting to the grind. However, that difference can only ever be so big before your strategies need to be more predictable and boring. It isn't technically impossible to beat his team at level 50, but you're basically just going to have to use Confuse Ray or Hypnosis and hope to RNGesus that you can successfully set up against all 6 of his members using X items or something. Again, it is doable, but if I have to resort to spamming Double Team or just getting lucky, it makes me feel like I cheated. Alternatively, you could simply compile a team of the statistically strongest Pokemon in the game to make up that level difference, but where's the fun in that? Eventually you're going to want to try out a team of lesser used Pokemon that can utilize some unorthodox strategies. I do it to make the game a little harder on myself, but I don't want to have to grind up levels just so weaker Pokemon won't instantly die. It is worth noting that it is my prerogative to stick so stubbornly to 6 members. If I drop my team down to just 4, or even just my starter, I probably wouldn't have to grind at all. Levels would be evenly distributed, and I don't think it would be nearly as severe. This is true, but there's something really special about having all 6 of your party slots filled out come the Hall of Fame. Every single important trainer in the series, including both Red and Lance in this game, have a full team of 6. Ash has a full team of 6 as well. I feel like they're trying to communicate something through that. 4 feels oddly insufficient. Not to mention, I have the benefit of hindsight here. I have never struggled with grinding past this generation. Not in Emerald, Platinum, Black and White, none of them. I'm always at or around a comfortable level range, sometimes even over the level range. And just to be extra sure my suspicions weren't unfounded, this also happens to me in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. There's something about the lack of experience you gain that's unique to Johto's design, be that a lack of trainers or a strange difficulty spike, and I can never seem to get past it without at least one long grinding session somewhere along the way. For those reasons and more, Gold and Silver Kanto has never really impressed me all that much. Sure, the time it must have taken to include is impressive. I've read the stories about Iwata slaving away at it for days on end. I adore the concept. Getting to see how Kanto has changed since your initial adventure is a novel idea the series hasn't seen in quite the same way since. They're building new stuff in Vermilion. Lavender Town has a radio tower now instead of a graveyard. Cinnabar Island burned down and now Blaine's gym is just inside a cave. Red is this legendary figure throughout the region, even his mom talks a big game. Blue seems much more mature, and he helms his own gym right before the League. As a Where Are They Now side attraction, it fulfills its purpose beautifully, but you can also mindlessly chew through it in a matter of hours. Every gym is an absolute cakewalk, and there's almost nothing going on in between gyms. They really try to occupy your time by forcing you to go to the power plant and blocking certain paths, but it's not like you get any new dungeons to conquer or something, it's just Kanto. Again. They even make you wake up Snorlax again. Hell, even the Johto Victory Road is just the one from Kanto with less stuff in it. Mount Silver, really the only substantial new content in the post-game, is a couple of rooms long with the boss fight as the main attraction. Clearly, the most work went into the new region, which makes sense. It mostly mirrors the progression of Red and Blue. You're on a quest for the 8 gym badges, there are a few obstacles in your way, and the odd dungeon thrown in there for good measure. Dungeons strike a really good balance in Johto, where Kanto had a giant needlessly confusing labyrinth as its ultimate test. The most complicated dungeon in Johto near the end of that initial journey is the equivalent of the game corner in Kanto. All the Goldenrod radio tower had to do was ask you to enter it from a different location to extend its length in a way that felt natural. There aren't nearly as many Team Rocket grunts throughout Johto, meaning that while you are occasionally stuck fighting really weak, samey Pokemon every now and again, it will never reach the peak annoyance levels of Kanto. That does mean there's not really a main antagonist, but I don't think there needed to be. Giovanni served his purpose in Kanto and definitely didn't need to return. You get your fill of story fights and legendary events outside of gym leaders. Though I do think there's a bit of a problem with some of these important characters, a problem I didn't have with the characters in Red and Blue. Your rival this time, as Chugga Conroy aptly put it, the red-headed stepchild, is another brand of jerk rival. Less of a cocky schoolyard bully, and more a power-hungry, edgy preteen who doesn't believe in the power of love. He's fine. I don't dislike him, but I also don't really ever think about him much. I'll admit, Blue was a tough act to follow. He was such a simple rival that all he had to do was aggravate you a bit to raise the stakes for the championship match. He's a tad rude, but at the end of the day, his spirit was one of an overzealous trainer who got ahead of himself. Silver is just mean. He hates anyone who he considers to be weak, constantly derides them for being weak, and declares that he will be the strongest in the world. He doesn't simply receive a starter from Professor Elm, he steals the damn thing. His arc is obvious to anyone with a set of functioning brain cells. He's going to learn the importance of loving your Pokemon, and he does. Kinda. By the very end of the post-game, there's a faint sliver of hope that he finally understands what he needs to do. After beating him down repeatedly, with his response always being confusion, your final battle with him shows that he maybe understands that power isn't everything. An understated touch is that he finally got to evolve his Golbat into Crobat, which is a friendship evolution. In between that time, however, he almost always has no reason to show up other than him being the rival. You simply can't fill this much time with meaningful character development for such a simple character problem. So instead, the game feels the need to have other characters constantly, and I mean constantly, drill it into his thick skull that he needs to love and trust his Pokemon. I really admire the effort to try and make us root for him, but his true development comes so late and is so understated that it's always been hard for me to care about what happens to him. Elm letting him keep the stolen Pokemon is really sweet, and it clearly affects his final developments, but I just don't think this is a strong enough conflict to carry a main rival for an entire Pokemon adventure unless you're willing to go deep into his flawed outlook on life, which isn't really what Pokemon was about in these early stages. A lot of people have told me that he's a fun rival to fight because he's such an asshole, and while I do understand that sentiment, my battles with him made me feel, at most, a sense of pity. Like, is this kid really that dense? I genuinely just feel sorry for him. At best, he's a cool idea, and at worst, he's a copy of Blue with all of his worst traits amplified. Unfortunately, this means there's not much of a competitive undercurrent to push you through to the end. I appreciate that the adventure is more relaxing, but it also means that doing the League Challenge again is a lot less exciting than when you were directly competing with Blue. Silver isn't even the champion this time around, and I get it. Repeating what Red and Blue did would just make the majesty of that moment less special, but there's a reason it worked so well in that game. And there's no better way for me to prove that than by pointing to what they decided to replace that idea with. Lance is the champion this time around. Lance. A former Elite Four member. And he's... how do I put this lightly? Oh god, he's just so boring. He stamps out Team Rocket grunts like they're nothing at all, and his dialogue desperately wants him to appear stoic and badass, but he's about as interesting as a plank of wood. He's a do-gooder strong guy. That's it. And while that worked for a semi-throwaway member of the Kanto Elite Four you only spoke with for a few seconds, for a champion that you team up with at various points throughout the game, that seems a little lame. Could you not have given him a few more unique Pokemon? You know, was it truly necessary to give him 3 Dragonite? Could you maybe have included one of the brand new dragon types you introduced in this generation for his team? Especially since he's apparently willing to use non-dragon types. Or does Kingdra not resemble a dragon? Can it truly get more boring than half of his team consisting of Dragonite? I suppose all of his team could have been Dragonite. I want to see the timeline where that ended up happening. I know people aren't going to like this, but Lance's underwhelming presence is part of the reason I've never been a big fan of the champion theme for Gen 2. I don't think the song itself is bad or anything, it's just where the song is used that baffles me. See, Red shares this musical piece with Lance, and that always struck me as odd. This song is going for an epic, larger-than-life motif in its instrumentation, and while conceptually it makes sense to give it to both the champion and the strongest trainer in the world, one of them is a really boring character trying to be a stoic badass, while the other really is a stoic badass at the top of a damn mountaintop, only speaking in ellipses and personifying the player character of your last adventure. One of them deserves this theme, and the other doesn't. But your first exposure to it is with the one who doesn't deserve it, rather than the one who does. So the impact it could have had on a first listen is always going to be lost on me. Karen would have been a way more interesting champion to follow. Not only is her team more interesting, she tells you about the importance of trying to win with your favorites and not focusing on strength. I feel like if she was the one to give Silver that message, it might have resonated more strongly. Instead, Lance, the guy who carries around 3 fucking Dragonite, tells Silver, oh, it isn't about strength. Brilliant. I do like that the gyms this time around cover types that weren't featured in Kanto. The first gym is Flying type, a much less brutal type for Chikorita to contend with. Helps that you can really pick up almost anything for Falkner and not get walled instantly since its typing isn't ridiculously defensive. Whitney gets to show off the sheer force of her normal types, Jasmine showcases how bulkier steel types are, and what's cool about all this is that it retains that organic difficulty based on your Pokemon selection. Other than maybe Falkner and Bugsy, you're gonna struggle at some gyms and flatten others. Even Price has given me trouble on occasion, since throwing a fire type at him means also contending with water and ground types. A less forgivable problem is Johto's reliance on HM use. While not the worst generation for HMs, it was probably the one that started the worrying trend. Gen 1 had its own annoying moments, forcing cut for Lieutenant Surge, but it was surprisingly not as overbearing as I remembered it being. Instead, Gen 2 had to be the painful reminder. Gold and Silver add more HMs and force you to use them at several points. I'm usually able to look past requiring Strength or Surf, since those moves are pretty useful in combat, but the addition of Waterfall and Whirlpool are so redundant. Waterfall is required for the Pokemon League, and that's it. Even better, it's required to traverse a one-room cave with nothing in it, a cave that seems to exist only to check that you indeed have Waterfall. I'm not going to go too deep into this problem because you already know the generation where I'm going to dig deep into this problem. It's just worth noting that Gen 2 started the trend and forced your designated water type to hold 3 water type moves for progression, unless you want to get rid of your water type for a large stretch of gameplay when it desperately needs to stay leveled up. It also generally requires that you always have a flying or water type, not because you actually want them, but because you know that fly and surf exist, and it would be much more convenient to not have to keep visiting your PC box. I do think unlocking the ability to use these HMs makes backtracking more fun. Much like a Metroidvania, you have to remember which areas you couldn't access before, and all of a sudden beating a gym means that secrets are opened up all across the region. Since Johto is built with more shortcuts than Kanto, like the Sudowoodo shortcut and the Dark Cave, traveling back to other areas for exploration makes more sense even when you don't have Fly. So, taking the red scale to Mr. Pokemon for the experience share, or going back to show Professor Elm your Togepi is quick and easy. I just think the idea of making HMs both permanent and necessary moves is a step too far, and it's one the series has had a really hard time abandoning.
Here it is, guys.
Think you can unlock the mystery of the unknown?
What do you think those strange markings mean? Just help me push.
You can enter the world of Pokemon Crystal, the latest adventure from Johto with an all-new Pokédex. Pokemon Crystal.
It's no secret that Red and Blue are fractured products held together by tape and glue. Gold and Silver have fixed almost all of their numerous problems, which is a Herculean feat in and of itself. It might sound pedantic, but it really is refreshing to not have to worry about speed being proportional to crit rate, or a 1 in 256 chance of missing any attack, or getting wrapped locked to death in every single battle. Which isn't to say Gen 2 is free of glitches, but they are so unbelievably rare that they're barely even worth mentioning. The inventory still sucks though. It is much more organized, with separate pouches for TMs and key items, but you can still only hold a pitiful amount in your main bag pouch before you have to start chucking items, and it has a tendency to make exploration a lot more tedious than it needs to be. One thing that has been remedied? Psychic types. Psychic types used to dominate the type chart in a way that was frankly insulting, but Gold and Silver have nerfed them in various ways. Firstly, the special stat was split into special attack and special defense, meaning Pokemon like Kadabra now function as the glass cannons they were likely meant to be. This change also lessened the importance of specially oriented typings a slight bit, though not by a huge margin. Psychic also has to contend with 2 new typings, Dark and Steel. Psychic is weak to Dark, which itself is immune to Psychic, and Steel resists Psychic. Bug, Psychic's other weakness, lost its weakness to Poison and gained an advantage over the newly introduced Dark type. The introduction of Pokemon like Scizor, as well as Bug-type Pokemon that could actually learn Bug-type attacking moves, meant that Bug finally cemented its place as a fitting counter to the dominant Psychic type. If you can believe it, there's yet one more change in that Psychic types are now weak to Ghost-type attacks, where they used to be entirely immune. What this means is that Pure Psychic now has 3 weaknesses instead of 1, is resisted by 2 typings instead of 1, and is completely ignored by 1 type. What's amazing about this nerf is that it didn't make Psychic types unusable. Far from it. They're still complete powerhouses, What it did do, though, is emphasize the importance of other types in relation to Psychic, and gave balanced team comps a new set of strengths that they wouldn't otherwise have had. I believe this set of typings and how they interact, on paper, are balanced so well that it's incredible, and all it really took was the introduction of 2 new types. Unfortunately, and there always has to be a fucking unfortunately, doesn't there? The Dark type is ridiculously scarce for a very long time, and is another reason I really don't like Kanto. If you want to use Houndoom, one of the coolest new additions to the Fire and Dark typings, you'll have to wait until you've defeated Lance and are already in Kanto, even though this is a Pokemon introduced in Johto. Murkrow, even though it's pretty middling, isn't available until Kanto, where he'd be useless anyway. In Gold and Silver specifically, Sneasel was only catchable in Kanto. But it's not like it even mattered much because its stat distribution is laughable for its typing. We're still several generations behind the physical special split, meaning that typings are given a physical or special distinction. Sneasel is a Dark and Ice type, a really interesting type that is supposed to give it a lot of weaknesses to cement its status as a glass cannon. It has pretty high physical attack and speed, which makes no sense given that its 2 typings are special, so it can't make use of Stab unless using its special attack, which is its lowest stat. In Gold and Silver, Sneasel's highest damaging move by level up is Slash, and that's seriously his best move. He learns Feint Attack, sure, but you should never be using it unless you want to deal chip damage. His other best options are Strength, Shadow Ball, Iron Tail, Dig. It's not terrible, and those moves can still make use of his high attack and speed, but why not just make his special attack higher instead so we can actually make use of his typing? And why place him in the post-game? He's not that good, is he? He's introduced in Johto yet only catchable in Kanto? Why? Your only Dark type option for Gold and Silver is Umbreon, a tanky Dark type, which is admittedly a pretty decent Pokemon, but why is it your only option for Johto? It makes absolutely no sense to me. You'd think the game would want to show off the new typing, right? Steel types get a pretty nice showing in terms of availability, so I really don't understand what happened with the Dark type. You could conceivably still get use out of Houndoom, but only for a few fights in the already short and easy Kanto. You'd really just be catching him to use against Red. One of my favorite things about building a personalized team is that you get them all at various different points and they'll all be with you come the League Challenge. You'll get to struggle through with them and they'll be memorialized in the Hall of Fame. You literally can't do that with some of these new Pokemon. You could challenge the League over again, but you'll be forever robbed of that first victory. The victory that made you a bona fide champion. So what does a second really mean? While the type chart is well balanced, it doesn't really get a ton of consistent use until future generations, even if it does effectively combat psychic types for the main game and for competitive. Suffice to say, work still needed to be done before true harmony could be achieved between these elements in the main campaign. Now, if you're a competitive player, that regard for single-player availability doesn't really matter because you'll have access to everything come the end of the game. I do think it's important to note that not everyone jumps into competitive battling, so most of the new Pokemon should be available at a point in which they can be used for at least part of the main game. The only exceptions would probably be the pseudo-legendaries, in this case the Tyranitar line, since they're quite frankly good enough to be as rare as they are. Some Pokemon are available in Johto, but are inexcusably rare. My Team for Gold version originally looked like this. I really wanted to use Granbull as my powerhouse normal-type pick. Not only does he learn Bite and Shadow Ball for a decent defense against psychic types, I also wanted to use a team of Pokemon that were exclusive to the generation. Unfortunately, in Gold and Silver, Snubbull is only catchable in one route, at a 1% encounter rate. I spent hours looking for a Snubbull, only to eventually give in and replace it with a Tauros because I was so tired of hunting for the damn thing. It makes sense to keep strong encounters a rarity, but Granbull isn't even that strong. In fact, many people would probably consider Tauros to be a straight up better Pokemon overall, and he has a higher encounter rate on the same route. Then again, perhaps I'm just not the kind of person who benefits from the adrenaline of finding a rare Pokemon. I am primarily a battler, and though dex completion can be fun, it is always going to be a secondary interest. For others, though, hunting Pokemon is the name of the game, and making certain monsters extremely rare is part of their struggle. It isn't too dissimilar to soft resetting for a shiny. It's about the thrill of finally finding that one Pokemon you needed. In many ways, this generation heightened that desire by introducing some new capture-related mechanics. By collecting apricorns, you can have Kurt craft a ton of specialty Pokeballs that can help you in capturing a wide variety. Friend Balls to raise friendship, Heavy Balls for heavy mons, Lure Balls for fishing. Some evolutions can only be triggered when a Pokemon is friendly with you, which is another addition to the series in which using a Pokemon in battle, walking around with it, and giving it certain items will raise its happiness. If you think about it, that one's a no-brainer. You actually come to love your Pokemon, and so they come to love you in return. Breeding is also an option, in which you can transfer some exclusive moves you wouldn't otherwise find, known as egg moves, and obtain unique baby Pokemon. Of course, this is also the generation that introduced the shiny Pokemon, where you have a 1 in 8,192 chance to encounter a differently colored sprite, which will never not be exciting for some reason. None of these new mechanics have anything to do with the core combat of the series, but they can give a player more to do than just fighting. Breeding is a complex web of systems that can see a Pineco gaining Reflect or a Snubbull learning Crunch. It is basically necessary for competitive battling, and you could conceivably spend most of your time breeding after the game is completed. An entire cottage industry has sprung up around hunting for shiny Pokemon and subsequently trading them over the GTS like they're some kind of black market currency. There's even a better reason to keep playing for days on end thanks to the new in-game clock, which follows the clock of the real world. If you wanted to do something like participate in a bug-catching contest for exclusive Pokemon, you'd have to wait until it was Tuesday or Thursday. You have to wait a day for Kurt to finish his Pokeballs. You have to wait until Friday to discover Lapras in Union Cave. This kind of thing is really easy to overlook nowadays, but it really helps to get players in a more social headspace. If your friend found a Lapras in Union Cave and you never did, you'd have to both figure out what caused Lapras to appear in Union Cave, and that's what Pokemon was built upon: communication. That day system mimics a daily quest system from an MMO, giving players a reason to come back every day. Finally, though this really has nothing to do with anything I've been talking about, this was the generation to introduce health items. I don't have a ton to say about it. It can increase the power of moves, keep you healthy, and a bunch of other stuff. It wasn't really an exceptional addition until later generations anyway. I just figured I had to mention it, or my comments would never let me hear the end of it. I like to think of Gold and Silver as the rocky base upon which the ideas in Red and Blue were taken to their next logical step. Not only did it completely fix the numerous and sometimes aggravating problems of the past, it introduced even more ways to interact with the world and the Pokemon in it. I've complained a lot about some of the new problems present in Gold and Silver, some of the lessons Game Freak didn't learn, but I hope that hasn't overshadowed how many extremely important lessons they did learn, especially because the sister version, Pokemon Crystal, alleviated many of those issues. Pokemon Yellow version changed a few things about Red and Blue, but most of it remained unchanged. Same glitches, same fights, except now you had a Pikachu. Crystal version is a whole separate ballgame, right down to the introduction of the choice between a male and a female player character. It might not seem like a big deal nowadays, but it took until the tail end of Generation 2 for Professor Oak to pop the old gender question. I don't think I need to explain why the addition of a female player option is good. A ton of wild Pokemon locations have been scrambled, making monsters like Snubbull actually possible to obtain. You can also obtain Growlithe outside of Violet City for an early fire type to use against Bugsy in case you didn't pick Cyndaquil. Storyline additions have been made to flesh out the various legends, including a more direct set of interactions with Suicune. In Gold and Silver, the legendary dogs would just roam around Kanto, and you could run into them at complete random as wild encounters. Whenever you switch areas, so will the legendary dogs. Unfortunately, to figure out which route they're on, you'll first have to encounter them, which can be a real pain in the ass since you're basically firing blind. Usually you can just use a repel into Pokemon below level 40 to ensure you find one, but it's still going to take a ludicrous amount of time since you could never know whether one is on your route or not. If you manage to find one, it can instantly run, and even if you manage to get off a mean look, It can also use Roar. Kinda despise roaming legendaries. I'm fine with hunting one of them since it can be a fun challenge to track them down and keep them docile, and hey, randomly stumbling into one of the legendary dogs out in the wild can be exciting. But 3 is extremely excessive and especially painful in Gen 2, where you can't even figure out their locations without first encountering them. Not every legendary needs to be holed up in a cave somewhere, but I'm glad that Crystal version took Suicune out of that rotation so you only need to look for the other 2. It didn't fix any of their problems, but one less roamer is fine by me. Though you do also need the 3 dogs before catching Ho-Oh and Crystal, whereas Gold and Silver kinda just let you tackle it in any order. I do think Crystal owns this requirement though, since Suicune plays a larger story role. Following Yusine's progression with the beast and its interactions toward the player give more insight into its nature. It kinda made me wonder just how intelligent these beasts really are. The ruins of Alph no longer feel so bare bones, as messages were included alluding to an ancient civilization. In Gold and Silver, they were kinda just ruins with unknown in them. Solving the picture puzzles barely said anything at all, and while the messages included aren't fantastical revelations, they're enough to get the player theorizing. Areas like Mount Mortar have been revamped, new trainers have been added, and there are even more organic daily events. Where trainers in your contacts would only call to battle you in Gold and Silver, Crystal added the ability for them to inform you of certain Pokemon appearing on routes, or of items they obtained and wish to give you. Their dialogue is also a lot more personalized, giving you more of a reason to care about the trainers you would otherwise trample over and forget about. In Gold and Silver, they followed a set script, only switching out Pokemon names here and there. Crystal also added day and night wild encounters, so playing during certain times of the day would change whether you'd be able to find a few monsters. Much like the Lapras example earlier, utilizing the time of day to hide rare encounters is both a genius move and one that sells the idea of a true day and night system. Several Pokemon are nocturnal, so of course you could only encounter them at night. Very immersive, if you will. Towns and caves have been visually altered to look a little nicer, and every single Pokemon now has a unique animation at the start of battle. It's hard to understate the importance of these minor animations. Even just a little life injected into these sprites fuels the imagination like nothing else. You get a sense of their personality, their quirks from their movement. Doubtless, almost all of my minor complaints with Gold and Silver have been fixed by the release of Crystal version. But here's the problem. This is the second instance of a third version being released at full price. This meant something. Pokemon could get away with releasing the same game not just twice, but one additional time with new bells and whistles. While the community now looks back on these sister titles fondly, since they're almost always the definitive versions, it's important to remember how much they retailed for when they released. I'm not saying that repackaging the same game with some minor adjustments and selling it at full price again is highway robbery for gullible children, but repackaging the same game with some minor adjustments and selling it at full price again is highway robbery for gullible children. At least there's a reason for these games to always have 2 different versions releasing at the same time. It's expected that you'll only be buying one of them and that you'll be seeking out people who have the opposite version for trading. Releasing a definitive third version with a sliver of extra content and revisions kinda just feels like a slap in the face. Even if Crystal version is indeed definitive. You should definitely be playing Crystal if you're playing Generation 2 in any capacity. I just don't like the precedent it ended up setting. Generation 2 then cements itself as a sheen of polish on the incredibly rough base that was the first generation, one that enhances its strengths while adding its own flair. It's not perfect, nor is it really one of my all-time favorite generations, but as a sequel to Red and Blue, despite many of its problems, it is certainly an impressive sequel. If you were to call Generation 2 your favorite, well, I wouldn't agree. Frankly, I prefer many of the future installments, but at least you'd have a better leg to stand on than you would for Red and Blue. If that's not the mark of at least a decent sequel, I don't know what is.